My name is Shalhevet Schwartz, and this is Gefet on Daf Yomi, a joint project of Hadran and Yeshivat Drisha. Today we'll be taking a break from some of the obscure coaching topics to talk about a mitzvah that actually with Rosh Chodesh Nisan is coming up pretty soon. The mitzvah of Sfirat HaOmer, which obviously the Gemara um, gets to in the context of its discussion of minchat HaOmer, but it is a mitzvah that obviously we continue to practice today and has a lot of the questions that we'll be exploring together today have a lot of halacha l'ma'aseh implications. But what we're going to try to do together via this sugya is to understand some of the key questions, key principles, and key machlokot at the root of this mitzvah. What's the nature of the mitzvah? What's the point of it? And because of due to the answers to those questions, what are going to be a couple of different halakhic nafkaminot. So let's jump in. The Gemara on Daf Samech Vav. Our sugya begins with Amar Abaye, mitzvah lemimne yome u mitzvah lemimne shvue. Right, the Abaye says there's a mitzvah to count days as well as to count weeks. As we know, right, when we count Hayom Asara Yamim Shehem Shavua Achad Shlosha Yamim, we count days and weeks as part of that. So that's Abaye. Rabbanan Debe Rav Ashi, Manu Yome Manu Shvue. So the rabbis of the house of Rav Ashi did so in accordance with Abaye's opinion. A Meimar Mane Yome Velo Mane Shvue, but a Meimar counted days and not weeks. Why? So the Gemara continues, Amar Zecher Lemikdashim. Abaye said that this mitzvah is zecher lemikdash. We'll see a little bit later what really is the connection between those two things. Why might it be that a mitzvah that is zecher lemikdash we would now count days and not weeks. But it seems like at least at first glance what part of what a meimar is saying is that right Sfirat HaOmer Bazman Hazeh has the status of Zecher Lemikdash, right? That as we know that phrase from, let's say, the fact that nowadays we take lulav all 7 days, even though in the time of the Mikdash, that would only happen in the Mikdash, and Bagvulin you would only take lulav for 1 day. So nowadays there's a takana d'Rabbanan, Zecher Lemikdash, in order to create some kind of memory of the time of the Mikdash. There's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan to do something Bazman Hazeh that really fundamentally would on a Doraita level would only happen in the Mikdash. So that's the sugya. And in their kind of comment on this sugya, Tosafot has takes issue with a number of different rulings of the Ba'al Halachot Gedolot. We together today are going to explore the second and third. Really, there are three. Takes issue with three rulings, and we're going to discuss the second and the third. So Tosafot here, the portion that we're going to read starts with V'hecha deshachach lisfor balayla, where if you forgot to count at night, pasak bahag shesofer bayom. So the bahag rules that if you forget to count at night, you can still count in the day. Right? We know that we're supposed to count at night. If we forget, probably, and we'll see at the end a little bit halakha l'ma'aseh, probably many of you are familiar with during the day realizing you forgot to count at night and counting in the day without a bracha. So the bahag, right, according to Tosafot here, says that if you forget to count at night, you can count during the day. The later Mefarshim are conflicted as to what the bahag meant, but it seems al panav like the bahag thinks that you could maybe even count with a bracha. At least the Mishnah Berurah understands in that way, and I think that's probably the pshat reading of the bahag in Tosafot here. Because we'll see why it is that the bahag rules that way. Pasak bahag shesofer bayom v'chein hayan yir'eh mitoch stam matnitin desof pirkin ditnan mitzvato balayla liksor v'im niktzar bayom kasher. So Tosafot is connecting this ruling of the bahag with the Mishnah at the end of this parak that right the Mishnah says it seems to say explicitly when it comes to not the counting of Sfirat HaOmer but the ksira, the harvesting of the Omer, that mitzvato balayla, that one is supposed to do it at night, but im niktzar bayom kasher, if it gets harvested during if it's reaped during the day, then it is kosher. That's what seems to be the Stam Mishnah in Menachot. seems to support the ruling of the Bahag. But Tosafot is going to bring two proofs against this ruling of the Bahag. First one, Aval nir el Rabbeinu Tam ikar idach stama de matnitin de perek sheni de Megillah. Right? Actually, Rabbeinu Tam thinks that, or points toward a different Stam Mishnah that seems that he's going to explain in a moment is going to imply the opposite. And Rabbeinu Tam thinks, okay, there's a machloket between two Stam Mishnahs, and the one that we hold by is the one in Megillah. So the Stam Mishnah in Megillah, Umaitila Besof Pirkin, right? The Stam Mishnah and Megillah we bring here in the end of our parak. And how does that Mishnah go? Kol halayla kasher liktsirat HaOmer. It says all night is kosher for the ksirat of the korban HaOmer. V'daikina mina dekatane laila dumyadiyom madiyom balayla lo af but delaila biyom lo. There is a diuk from the language of the Mishnah that just like things that mitzvah kol hayom have to happen during the day and they can't happen at night. So too, kol halayla kasher means that only at night is okay, and if it happens during the day, it's not okay. So it seems like there are these two mishnayot that are brought in conflict with one another, and Rabbeinu Tam says we hold like the one that says that kol halayla kasher l'tzirat ha'omer, aka only at night, and you can't do it during the day. That's proof number one against the Bahag. And proof number two, this gets the logical progression here gets a little tricky, so bear with me. So amrinan be reish moed katan, Rabban Gamliel beit dino nimnu al shlosha prakim halalu v'hitiru. So Tosafot here is quoting the Gemara and Moed Katan about a discussion of Tosafet Shvi'it, right? That the Isurim of Shvi'it, there is a machloket Tanaim basically about whether or not the Midoraita, the Isurim of Shvi'it actually begin before Rosh Hashanah of the Shemitah year. And Rabban Gamliel Beit Dino, even though there was an Isur practiced before the time of Rabban Gamliel Beit Dino, they came and they said, we're gonna basically erase that extra prohibition of Tosafet Shvi'it. Umasik Rav Ashi hatam desavar la ke Rabbi Yishmael. So Rav Ashi and Amora later on, in trying to understand what was going on with Rabban Gamliel Beit Dino, right in the time of the Tanaim, understands that ruling as in accordance with the drasha of Rabbi Yishmael over the drasha of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael are divided as to how to read or what to darshan from the pasuk becharish uvakatzir tishbot. Right, so becharish uvakatzir tishbot. Rabbi Akiva learns from that about Tosafet Shvi'it. It seems to be an extra pasuk, right? But we know that Charish and Katzir we already know that Charish and Katzir are asur during Shvi'it. They're prohibited during Shvi'it to plow and harvest. So Rabbi Akiva says, this extra pasuk is there to basically teach us about Tosafet Shvi'it, and Rabbi Yishmael says something else. Rabbi Yishmael says, no, you're totally reading this wrong. It has nothing to do with does nothing to do with Tosafet Shvi'it. What is Rabbi Yishmael's drasha? Ma charish reshut af katzir reshut. Yatsa katzir haomer shehu mitzvah. It's actually talking about Shabbos, and the isur of charish and katzir on Shabbat is an isur specifically of charish and katzir that are optional, or that are reshut. And we can learn from that in the particular case of katzir, which is a mitzvah, it would be doche Shabbat. So the katzir that is a mitzvah, and what's the katzir that is a mitzvah? That's katzirat haomer. The katzir of the omer is doche Shabbat because it is a mitzvah. That's the drasha of Rabbi Yishmael. And Rav Ashi comes and says, it must be that Rabban Gamliel, who erased Tosafet Shvi'it, held like Rabbi Yishmael about how to read this pasuk. He must have held like Rabbi Yishmael that what the pasuk really means is that Ksirat HaOmer is doche Shabbat, meaning that you can do it on Shabbat because of the importance of the mitzvah. Now, the final step here, right? Because to go back to the Bahag's question about whether or not you can do Ksirat HaOmer during the day, the kevan dedach Shabbat ein niksar ela balayla kedemuchach besof pirkin. In the discussion at the end of the parak, Tosafot points out, right, those two questions, the question of doche Shabbat and the question of must it be done at night and can't be done at all during the day, the Gemara later on in our parak connects those two issues and says, look, if it's doche Shabbat, that's because it has to be done k'mitzvata. It has to be done the kind of proper way that we were commanded to do it. And we were commanded to do it at night. That's why it's doche Shabbat, right? That we were commanded to do it at that moment. That's why it's so important that we do it that way, that it's doche Shabbat. If you could be yotze even if you did it lo k'mitzvata, then it would no longer be doche Shabbat. That's a discussion that he quotes from later on in the parak. And so because we know that la halacha, we hold that it's doche Shabbat, we must know that also the halacha, it must be done at night. We have to hold like this, like the other Stam Mishnah, the Stam Mishnah and Megillah, and not like the Stam Mishnah here. So that's Tosafot's proof against the Bahag. Right, just to summarize real quick, according to the Bahag, someone who forgets to count at night can count during the day. It seems like he's saying even with a bracha. And why? Because we know that the Sfirat HaOmer, the Omer harvest could be that happen during the daytime. Whereas Rabbeinu Tam, right, holds the opposite. Someone who forgets to count at night cannot count during the day. Why? Because the Omer harvest could not even be happen during the daytime. What's shared between these two positions? Both of them, kind of on a baseline level, want to learn the dinim of Sfirat HaOmer from the dinim of Ksirat HaOmer. Right? There's some kind of fundamental connection, both for Rabbeinu Tam and for the Bahag, between the act of harvesting and then bringing the Korban HaOmer to this period of counting. But as we'll see in a moment, the Sefer HaChinuch in his explanation of the reasoning or the behind the mitzvah of Sfirat HaOmer is going to take a totally different tack, and not really tie it necessarily to the bringing of the Korban HaOmer itself. What does he say? Mipnei ken ki hi kol ikaran shel Yisrael va'avoran yig'alu ve'alu kol hagdula she'alu eleha nitztavenu limnot mimochorat Yom Tov shel Pesach ad netinat haTorah leharot benafshinu hachefetz hagadol el yom hanichbad v'hanichsaf libenu ke'eved yishafzel. So, in case you got lost in the poetic language here in the Chinuch, what's he saying? He's saying Sfirat HaOmer really, it's a countdown from Pesach to Shavuot. It is a countdown, and this is, I think, how a lot of us think about it. It's a countdown from the Geula, the Yetziat Mitzrayim that Pesach or Chag HaMatzot comes to signify. And right, really, what was the purpose of God bringing us out of Egypt? God brought us out of Egypt in order to give us the Torah. Right, if we're thinking in prep for Pesach mode, if we're thinking about right, like so much of what happens at the Seder, right, maybe God brought us out of Egypt so that we could do mitzvot. So here too, the kind of pinnacle of the culmination really of Yetziat Mitzrayim happens at Matan Torah. And so we start counting from Mochorat HaShabbat, from the day after Pesach, to basically count down to Shavuot. And he says afterwards, right, that it really that's part of the reason we count up rather than counting down, is because we don't want to say, oh, like what a shame, we've really got 49 whole days left until Shavuot. No, we want to start thinking, oh wow, 1 day's gone by, 2 days has gone by. It sort of allows us to build up in the excitement as we move toward that holiday. So the Chinuch is taking a totally different direction, not necessarily linking the Sfirat HaOmer to the bringing of the Korban. And as we'll see in a moment, that might have ramifications, right? That'll have ramifications for, is the mitzvah of Sfirat HaOmer Bazman Hazeh also Deoraita? Right? He's counting the mitzvot of the Rambam. We'll see that the Rambam for sure thinks that Sfirat HaOmer is Deoraita even Bazman Hazeh. But really, it's fundamentally based on a kind of different idea, right? We see sort of two different understandings of what Sfirat HaOmer is. Is it, as the Bahag and Tosafot understood it, a way of counting, let's say, from the Korban HaOmer to the Shtei HaLechem? It's really fundamentally tied to the Mikdash and to the rituals of the Mikdash during this period. Without the Mikdash, then, it would only be a mitzvah de Rabbanan, Zecher LeMikdash, right? Echoes of HaMeimar that we saw in the sugya. Or is it like the Chinuch understood it as a way of counting from Pesach, from Chag HaMatzot to Shavuot, a way of preparing ourselves for really the culmination of that geula. The geula from Mitzrayim really ultimately is toward the end of Matan Torah. And then in that case, even today, without the Mikdash, there would still be a mitzvah d'oraita of Sfirat HaOmer. Um, the Ba'al HaMa'or brings an interesting nafkamina between these two ways of understanding um, these two different ways of understanding the mitzvah. Is it about Pesach to Shavuot, or is it really a Zecher l'Mikdash way of kind of remembering the rituals that once happened in the Mikdash? What's his question? His question is about whether or not we say Shehechianu, or why it is that we don't say Shehechianu, let's put it that way, on Sfirat HaOmer. So Sfirat HaOmer, Yesh Sholin Ma Ta'amin Anu Omrim Bozman. Why don't we say Shehechianu? And what he says at the end, right, is that Sfirat HaOmer ein bo zecher l'shum hana'ah. The bracha of Shehechianu is something that we say on happy occasions, right? We know that on things that bring us joy. So the Shehechianu on Chagim ultimately, let's say, is linked to the fact that there's joy associated with it. But Sfirat HaOmer, he says, it's not actually a happy thing. If we think, right, Ella le'ogmat nafshenu lechorban beit lechorban beit moyenu. So the mitzvah of Sfirat HaOmer, here he's really going in the Zecher L'Mikdash direction, right? The idea of Sfirat HaOmer Bazman Hazeh is not really to do the mitzvah as it was meant to be done can't be done anymore. It's about counting from one korban to the other korban. It's about the korban HaOmer. We can't do it anymore. And what it is that we do nowadays, the mitzvah de Rabbanan, really is it's on some level an act of mourning. It's remembering what it is that we've lost. And that's why, says the Ba'al HaMa'or, we don't say Shechianu. Just to return quickly back to our sugya, I think there's a way of understanding this machloket as to kind of the roots and the essence of the mitzvah, perhaps as the machloket between Abaye or Rav Ashi on the one hand and a Maimar on the other. Abaye says we count days and weeks, and a Maimar says no, we only count days. Why? Because it's Zeicha Mikdash, right? So maybe Abaye and Rav Ashi, who don't want to kind of take the mitzvah a notch down nowadays, right? Maybe it's they think like the chinuch that even today without the Mikdash, there's still, let's say, there's still mitzvah d'oraita, because really it's about the transition from Pesach to Shavuot, and so we would still do the mitzvah in its kind of full at full force. Safarta lecha sheva Shabbatot shanim tesha tisperu chamishim yom, as the pasuk says. Whereas the Meimar says no, we downgraded a little bit, because really what the mitzvah is about is the korban getting from the korban haomer to the shtei halechem, and without the mikdash, it's only a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Rabbeinu Yerucham has an interesting sort of third shita, or in which he kind of takes an in-between stance as to whether or not this mitzvah is zecher l'mikdash or is really deoraita even bazman hazeh, which is that he thinks that we should draw a distinction between counting weeks and counting days, right? What does the pasuk say? The pasuk says Safarta lecha sheva Shabbatot Shiv'a Shavuot tisfor lach miyom haviachem et omer hatnufa sheva Shabbatot mimot tihyena. That's the pasuk. Ad mimochorat haShabbat hashvi'it tisperu chamishim yom. So we see the language of weeks and the language of days. And what does Rabbeinu Yerucham say? I'm not going to read him entirely inside, but he says that the Shiv'a Shavuot tisfor lecha, that comes directly is directly before the pasuk, the phrase miyom haviachem et omer hatnufa, that the counting of weeks is intrinsically connected to the bringing of the korban haomer, and that is going to be only deoraita when the Beit HaMikdash is kayam. And now after the korban HaMikdash, the counting of weeks becomes just zecher l'mikdash. However, the counting of days, that's not true, right? Hanu dichtiv ad mimocharat haShabbat hashvi'it yisperu 50 yom. Why does he say mimocharat haShabbat miyom aviachem et omer shnufa? Right, it's not counting from the day after bringing the omer, it's also counting from the day after the Shabbat, meaning the day after Chag HaMatzot, right, the day after the first day of Pesach. And because of that, he says the counting of days is intrinsically connected not to the bringing of the Omer, but to Chag HaMatzot. And so the counting of days would hold even after the Chorban Habayit, and therefore, right, that would still be Doraita Bazman Hazeh. And so he wants to go back and read this machloket between Abaye and a Meimar, not as a question of whether we downgrade the mitzvah because it's all nowadays Zeichar Mikdash, but actually that the question of weeks and the question of days correspond specifically to that machloket. The real question here is whether or not he wants to say whether or not we count with a bracha on days and on weeks. And Abaye says that both are min haTorah, but a Meimar says no. Only days are min haTorah because the counting of weeks is just Zeichar L'Mikdash, and that we can't do with a bracha. So just this here at the end, right? Abaye, Ameimar mane yomi velo mane shvuei amar zeichar lemikdashu perush sfirat hashavuot ina ela zeichar lemikdash. Right, the counting of weeks is only zeichar lemikdash. Ulekach lo haya moneh shavuot im birkat hayamim. So he wouldn't count, he wouldn't count the weeks along with the bracha, right, that he would say on the days. That's this third in-between shita. For Rabbeinu Yerucham, he manages to sort of keep both. The counting of weeks corresponds maybe to the Tosafot and the Bahag's position, something that has to do specifically with the Mikdash and would therefore only be doraita when the Beit HaMikdash is kayam, but that the counting of days is that is connected to this transition from Pesach to Shavuot, and that's doraita even Bazman Hazeh, it gets a bracha. The Rambam. So the Rambam takes also what seems to be a perhaps confusing direction, which on the one hand, right, maybe seems simple in that he says mitzvah aseh lisbor shiva shabbatot miyom hava'at HaOmer shene'amar sfatem lachem mi'ocharat shabbat shabbatot. Fine, there's a mitzvah to count Sfirat HaOmer u'mitzvah limnot hayamim im hashavuot shene'amar tisberu 50 yom. Right, you gotta count days with weeks. U'mitchilat hayom monin lefikach monin moneh balayla and then I'm just skipping to the end. Mitzvah zo al kol ish miYisrael u'v'chol makom u'v'chol zman nashim v'avadim p'turim mimena. Okay, so this mitzvah is incumbent upon all men b'chol makom u'v'chol zman. Right, sounds like even nowadays. So on the one hand, this looks a little bit like the ruling of the chinuch. On the other hand, where does he put it? He puts it in Hilchot Tamidin Musafin, right? It's part of the right. If it really didn't have anything to do with the Korban and had to do with instead Chagim, you would expect it to be in Zmanim. But no, it's placed here in the part of the Rambam that really has to do with Korbanot, the Korban Tamid, Korban Musaf. So what's going on? The Griz, who is the brisker of, tries to explain this Rambam, and also we're not, for time purposes, not necessarily going to read the whole thing inside. He explains that the Gemara in Menachot that comes to say that nowadays it's the mitzvah is only the Rabbanan is going to it is according to a shita that the Rambam doesn't hold, like that the kedusha of the Mikdash kadsha latid lavo. The kadsha lo kadsha latid lavo. That it's kedusha Mikdash lo kadsha latid lavo. But before and through that, he's gonna explain why it is that the Rambam could, on the one hand, both think that it's connected to the Mikdash, and think that it's still where that the mitzvah is noheg b'chol zman. So how does he explain it? Pshita de lo talui b'ma'aseh ha'akrava b'foal ela de kevan debatel din ha'omer zehu mevatel gam mitzvah tzfira. he doesn't think that the mitzvah of Sfirat HaOmer is dependent on whether in reality we actually bring the korban. Even if in reality we don't bring the korban, the question of whether or not the mitzvah is in effect, is in force, midoraita, is going to depend on whether or not din HaOmer, whether or not in theory the mitzvah of korban HaOmer is still in force. And according to the position that kedushat hamikdash lo kachalati tavo, meaning from the point at which the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, then right not only was in practice the Mikdash was destroyed. Now in practice we can't bring korbanot, but also the dinim of the korbanot are now batel, and the kedusha of the Mikdash is no longer is no longer in force. And it's a big machloket that has a lot of implications. Let's say for questions of to do with har habayit and bringing korban pesach bazman hazeh and all sorts of implications like that. If you think, says the Brisker of that that once the Chorban Habayit happened, all of that Kedusha sort of stopped, then not only would we not in practice be bringing Korban HaOmer, but the deen of the Korban HaOmer would no longer be in force. And if the deen of Korban HaOmer is no longer in force, then so too the deen of Sfirat HaOmer would no longer be in force. And therefore, Sfirat HaOmer Bazman Hazeh would be D'Rabbanan. But what does the Rambam think? Right, and that's what a Maimar thinks, let's say. But what does the Rambam think? The Rambam thinks, okay, but we don't hold that like that about the Kedusha of the Mikdash. What does the Rambam think? The Rambam thinks that that Kedusha Mikdash lo batla, right? That even since Korban Habayit, the Kedusha is still in force. Therefore, even though we can't in practice bring Korban HaOmer, the deen of Korban HaOmer is still in effect. And because the deen of Korban HaOmer is still in effect, then the mitzvah of Sfirat HaOmer would still have a deoraita force. So the Rambam, who on the one hand seems to paskin like the Sefer HaMitzvot that it is in effect nowadays, on the other hand seems to paskin like the Bahag and the Rabbeinu Tam, that it's intrinsically connected to the Korban element and not to the Chagim element. How do we reconcile those two positions? Says the Brisker Rav, this is very it's a very Brisker Chakira, that the mitzvah of Sfirat HaOmer is connected not to the actual hakrava of the korban, but is connected to whether or not in principle or in theory the deen of the korban is still in force. Okay, that was all that first to do with that first machloket between the Bahag and the Tosafot and what emerged from that. If you want to stop here, that we've learned for long enough, but if you've got 10 minutes to keep going for part two, we're gonna get into one other machloket between Tosafot and Bahag. So this is the continuation of Tosafot here. Od pasak Ba'al Halachot Gedolot she'im hifsik yom echad v'lo safar shuv eino sofer mishum debayat mimot v'tema gedolahu v'lo yitachen. So what else does the Bahag say? The Bahag says that if you miss a day, then you're out, as many of us probably have experienced in the past, that if you miss a day of Sfirat HaOmer, at the next day you can't jump back in. Why? Because bayat mimot, there's a requirement of that the counting be tmimot, right? Sheva Shabbatot tmimot tihena. Full, complete, however we translate that word. But Tosafot doesn't really understand this position. He's like, what are you talking about? There's a mitzvah to count every day. So if you've missed the 13th day, okay, so like what? You miss Shacharit one day, you can't daven Shacharit the next day. That's not how mitzvot work. Tosafot is astonished by this ruling of the Bahag. So we're going to see a couple of different attempts to maybe explain or offer different theories of that might account for this ruling of the Bahag. But first, just the language of the Bahag himself, as quoted by Tosafot here, is that there's a requirement of timimot, and that's why if you forget a day, you stop counting. Whereas Rabbeinu Tam thinks if you forget a day, you keep going. So the Sefer HaChinuch here again gives here he actually holds like the Bahag, but he gives an explanation that's a little bit different. What does he say? Im shachach v'lo manami ba'erev moneh lemachar kol yom. Right, that's one opinion, the opinion of Tosafot. V'yesh omrim sham shemisha shachach v'lo manah yom echad she'in yachol limnot od be'ota shana. That if you miss a day, you're out for the rest of the year. Why? Lefi shekulan mitzvah achate. ומכיוון ששכח מהן יום אחד, הרי כל חשבון בטל ממנו. So the Sefer Chinuch's explanation is that actually there isn't a mitzvah to count on day 1 and a mitzvah to count on day 2 and a mitzvah to count on day 3, etc., etc. There's one mitzvah. The mitzvah is to count from Pesach to Shavuot. And the if you didn't count, let's say, on day 5, then you're not going to be able to have counted completely from Pesach to Shavuot. And one of the nafkaminas of this question, let's say, and this is a question that comes up for a lot of people, is someone who becomes bar mitzvah during the period of Sfirat HaOmer, so inherently was unable to, especially right, if you think that the mitzvah is doraita, was unable to be mekayim the mitzvah midoraita, let's say for the first 32 days. So on day 33, can he count with a bracha? So it's a question. If you think really it's all one mitzvah, lichora, according to the position of the chinuch, you shouldn't be able to. The chinuch in the end says, "Lo rumorinu shabadorinu lisvarazo ela mishachach yom achad yomar emesh hayu kach below bracha u'moneh ha'achirim im kol Yisrael." So actually, he holds like we'll see, and we'll see when it comes to psak halacha, he holds the way that we hold nowadays also, which is that you can. If you forget at night, you can count in the morning, and then if you count in the morning without a bracha, then you can keep going the next night, and we'll see a little bit about why that is. So just again to summarize quickly, right? If you forget a day, you stop counting. That theory, the way that Tosafot explained it was that it requires tmimot, and the chinuch's explanation, what does that mean, or either how do we understand that requirement of tmimot, or maybe it's a different reason. It's all one mitzvah, says the chinuch. Rabbeinu Tam, on the other hand, right, again, if you forget a day, you keep going. Another explanation as brought in the Greed, which is Rav Soloveitchik, about what might be behind this position that you can't keep counting, is actually not that it's all one mitzvah. He wants to say, no, they're separate, right? You're being mekayim a mitzvah, a separate mitzvah every day, but then why would you not be able to jump back in? Chaluda mitzvah, he says, shebechol yom vayom, right? There's a new mitzvah that's chal every day. Zikukali yesod shel tmimut bechol sfirat arba'im v'tisha yom. There's a requirement of tmimut for each and every one of the 49 countings. ואם חסרה ספירה של יום אחד, שוב אינו יכול לקיים את המצווה של הימים שלאחריה, משום שחסר להן הדין של תמימות. If, let's say, I didn't count day number 32, then day number 33, right, even though it's its own mitzvah, will not in and of itself be a complete counting. It won't be a bona fide good counting, because it has to be, right, if you imagine a stack of bricks, let's say, that are building on top of each other, so you can't put on the 33rd brick, right, even if it's its own separate brick or its own separate mitzvah, can't be put on the 33rd slot if there were not 32 bricks before. That's right, that's the whole that's why it's counting, says the Rav, right? And therefore, even though they are separate mitzvot, you still wouldn't be able to jump back in if you missed a day. It could be that a nafkamina maybe between the Sefer HaChinuch's understanding of the explanation and the Rav's understanding of the explanation might be, right, what if I did miss a day, then what does that mean retroactively about all the days that I've counted up until that point? According to the Chinuch, if it's all one mitzvah, I just didn't complete the whole mitzvah. I didn't complete the counting of 49 days, and because of that, I might say that the previous countings would have been a bracha levatala. On the other hand, if I think like the Greed, that no, each day is its own separate mitzvah. The question is just whether I can be mekayim the mitzvah of that day bitmimut, right? I can count 33 days in a sort of complete and whole way. So it would certainly, the brachot that I've made up until that point would be totally fine, right? I was mekayim the mitzvah on days 1 through 31 perfectly. The problem is just that I now can't be mekayim the mitzvah of day 33. So just to kind of look at these these different explanations as seen together. Right, the Chinuch says it's all one mitzvah, right, and the Tosafot's requirement of timimot or timimut, right, is explained by the Grid as saying that each day has to be tamim, has to sort of be a consecutive culmination of all of the days up until that point. And without that, right, each day's mitzvah is right, the specific mitzvah of that day can't be completed properly. So, right, as we've seen, those two machlokot, one about day versus night, and then the implications of that for, oh, really, what is this mitzvah about? Is it about the korban HaOmer, or is it about the time of year, Pesach to Shavuot, the Geula, and the implications of that for Deoraita, Rabbanan? What does that mean? Days, weeks, etc. And then that second debate between Tosafot and the Bahag about if I miss a day, can I jump back in? So real quick, let's just do a little bit of psak halacha. Let's just look at how this gets brought down in the Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Berurah a little bit. What do we see here in the Shulchan Aruch? Shachach v'lo v'yirech kol halayla yisfor bayom v'lo bracha. So a sort of compromise position, it seems, between the Bahag and the Tosafot. You should then count during the day, but without a bracha. Why? Says the Mishnah Berurah, yesh lachus l'da'at ha'poskim she'ein zman sfira ela balayla, u'kshemevarich bayom hu levatala. Right? We want to be choshesh for the position of the Tosafot that you can only count at night and that you can't count during the day. And so we don't want to make a bracha, what would be a bracha levatala for Tosafot, so we don't say a bracha. Mihu, however, mikan hu lehaba sofer kol halayla bivracha velo have kedileg yom echad legamrei sheino sofer od bivracha ukedilakame. However, going on from there, we let you do it. Why? We'll see, because there's a sfeik, and we're going to see that, right, that on the one hand, we've got the position of the Bahag that you can count during the day. On the other hand, or not even a sfeik, it's mimanashach. On the other hand, if you hold like Tosafot, you can jump back in. So if you hold like Tosafot that you can't count during the day, it doesn't matter, I can jump back in. And if you hold like the Bahag that you cannot jump back in, well, you could count during the day, so you're okay. If you count during the day, missed a night, then you can jump back in the next day. And then one other piece here, im shachach levarich be'echad mehayamim bein yom rishon bein mishar yamim sofer b'shar yamim below bracha. Right? If you really miss a full day, you really get out, then you keep counting, but without a bracha. Also because we're not sure whether we hold like this position of the Bahag, right? The Mishnah Berurah explains, the reason you keep counting is because there are a lot of positions, aka Tosafot, that you can keep going with, each mitzvah, each day is its own mitzvah, but below bracha, you don't make a bracha, right? That we want to be choshesh for the position who thinks that we require timimot in this way, the position of the Bahag, perhaps as explained by the Chinuch, perhaps as explained by the Grid. The halakha dehach, right, and we haven't had shiva shavuot timimot, the halakha dehach asar chad yoma. ונכון בזה שישמע ברכה מן השץ ומאחד מהמברכים ויענאמין בכוונה לצאת ואחר כך לספור. Ideally, though you can't make the bracha, you should go to shul. Always good to go to shul for Mariv. Here, the shliach tzibor make the bracha. You could say amen, have kavana to be yotzei, just in case, again, according to the position of Tosafot, that you can keep going. And finally, one sort of interesting little machloket that we get in the Achronim. The Shulchan Aruch says, "Aval im hu mesupak im dileg yom echad velo siper velo safar." Sorry, yisfor b'shar yamim bivracha. Right, if you're not sure whether you counted yesterday, you can keep going even with a bracha. So why is that? According to the Mishnah Berurah, deika sfeika shema lo dileg klal. Ve'im timtza lomar shedileg shema halakhic ke'otan poskim dechol yom hu mitzvah. So we've got a sfeika, right? Maybe I actually didn't miss a day, because that's the whole point. I'm not sure whether I missed a day. Maybe I didn't miss a day. And even if I did miss a day, well, we've got Tosafot. Maybe we hold like Tosafot, that every day is its own mitzvah and I can jump back in whenever I want. So once we've got a sfeika, then you're okay. You can keep going with a bracha. That's the Mishnah Berurah's explanation. But the Gra comes in with a different explanation, which is the yesh omrim the sfirat bazman hazeh deoraita. the but there's the position there's a position that even Sfirat HaOmer, the Rambam, that even Sfirat HaOmer B'zman Hazeh is Deoraita, Abaye, perhaps. Um, and in general, even though we say Safek Brachot Lahakel, when it comes to brachot that are midoraita, or that when it comes to mitzvot that are midoraita, um, that with mitzvot deoraita we say Safek Lachmir, and and right, if the we have a suffix, but it's perhaps a doraita, then that kind of offers a different explanation of why it is that we could jump back in a case of suffix. So just as we enter into this season, the season that'll begin with Pesach and Sfirat Omer and Shavuot, the a time of Geula leading toward Matan Torah. Hopefully we've covered kind of some of the basic, laid some basic groundwork for really what's going on during this period, what's going on, what is this mitzvah really about, and what does that mean ultimately la halacha on a number of different planes and levels. Thanks so much, and see you next week.